Evening. Dear audience, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to our 7th episode of Project Idea webinar. Today, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Lada Roslinski from Ukraine joining us, and she's going to speak on a very interesting topic, and I'm going to share the title very shortly. Before I formally begin, let me do the treaty recognition. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homelands of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, as I briefly mentioned, Dr. Lada is going to speak to us with a very interesting topic, and the title of our talk today is A Dark Side of Soft Power, Russia's Genocidal Post-Truthism, quote unquote. Before I really welcome our speaker to take the floor, let me also share with you that we are joined this afternoon by our advisors, David Newman, Gary Senft, our project coordinator, Mr. Quazo, and our consultant, Karina Denskisk. So the project IDEA, which stands for Identify, Demystify, and Empower, Countering Disinformation on Ukraine War, is funded by Department of Heritage within the Digital Citizenship Contribution Program. This project supports Government of Canada's following program objectives: to help to develop the tools and skills necessary to better equip Canadians in the face of disinformation and other related online harms and threats to our country's democracy and social cohesion; to build capacity to address disinformation and other related online harms and threats to our country's democracy and social cohesion through expert knowledge, enhanced cooperation, and knowledge transfer to key government and civil society stakeholders; and finally, empowering Canadians to take steps to mitigate against the potential impact of disinformation and other related online harms and threats to our democracy and social cohesion. Project IDEA has 3 parts. First is analyze and determine trends and propaganda through artificial intelligence-driven tools. Secondly, demystify propaganda through subject matter experts by podcast and webinars. And thirdly, to empower young Ukrainian diaspora and Russian diaspora living in the city of Winnipeg in Manitoba through education, through workshops. The project deliverables are podcast, webinars, and series of workshops and artificial intelligence-driven tools. Dear audience, without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished speaker today. Dr. Lada Roslinski is the founder and managing partner of Black Trident Defense and Security Consulting Group. She consults business, non-governmental, and governmental organizations on matters pertaining to national security and defense policy, analysis, advocacy, and media relations. With over 25 publications, including top-level sources such as United Nations Yearbook of International Law and Newsweek magazine, she has presented at and coordinated over 30 high-level international conferences and work groups, including NATO's Cyber Security Science for Peace program. An American, Canadian, Ukrainian international security expert, she is the lead author of the National Security section of the 2019 Toronto Principles, the 5-year roadmap for Ukrainian reforms. And it goes on. There is, I would say, a very impressive bio that the speaker shared with us. And during the process of our presentation, I would share the website link. You will get more details about the distinguished panelists today and know about her works. So as I promised, without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Lada Roslinski from Ukraine joining us here this afternoon. And it is definitely a little late in the evening in Ukraine. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Lada. Floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kauser. And I would like to also thank the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute in Canada for doing such a good job to dedicate the future of humanity into something that belongs to an understanding of peace and truth rather than destruction and annihilation. Today's topic is going to be a mix of soft power, psychological warfare, and it will show how psychological operations are used to create a very, very real war and ethnic cleansing genocide in Ukraine. A little bit about my company. Black Trident is a Ukraine-oriented security and defense consulting group. We do research, advocacy, strategic communications, and strategy development for companies as well as countries and non-governmental organizations interested in working with or in Ukraine. So I would like to first mention that you will see small letters and not capital letters in the titles of Kremlin and Russia throughout this presentation. This is a conscious decision which we see being done globally by people who understand that letters and words have meaning. We are gathered today because of the Russian war and terrorist activity that it sprung on the world in February of this year. And today, Russia is behaving like a global terrorist state, which uses Machiavellian fear to commit genocide in Ukraine and beyond. It is also using post-truthism, i.e. lies, or the concept that truth does not exist per se, in order to destruct the institutions that have been created after the Second World War. And these institutions, as weak as they may be, were created and are based on preambles focusing on the development of global peace and cooperation. And also, very importantly, through its lies, the Russian Federation, particularly the Kremlin, has weaponized law. We understand that the method is extremely dangerous because they use myths and lies within the codified legislation in order to force democracy and freedom-loving individuals and states to apply a rule of law that they are actually having no disregard towards, no regard towards. Quickly, without going into the details, the legal details of what genocide is, it is important to understand that war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide are not mutually exclusive. In fact, genocide depends greatly on an accumulation of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Legally, it means actions that destroy a group in whole or in part, which is important, and the intention to do so. And today we will be focusing more on the intention of the Russian Federation to commit genocide and eliminate Ukraine rather than the manners in which they are doing it. We begin with a terrible handbook that was published on RIA Novosti, which is Russia's formal media outlet for the Kremlin, although we all pretty much understand that the Russian Federation has no free media whatsoever. The document that was posted has now been globally recognized as a genocide handbook because it contains an explicit program for the elimination of the Ukrainian nation as such. And it does so by using the term Nazis, Nazification, and denazification of Ukraine. In official Russian usage, what this means is actually the destruction of the Ukrainian state and nation. I would like to move to consider a few of the narratives held within this handbook before looking into who wrote it and how it directly relates not only to national security, but international security. In this handbook, the establishment of Ukraine, so Ukraine's independence, sovereignty 30 years ago, is the Nazification of Ukraine. So 30 years ago, Ukraine became a sovereign state and we were all Nazis. And anything that has to do with building the state, albeit economically, culturally, infrastructure wise, everything is connected to Nazis. It's a Nazi act. Ukrainians are Nazis because they failed to accept the necessity that the Ukrainian people must support Russia. And this is where the geopolitical angle comes in. Russia needs to have power over Kiev and over Ukraine. That is the narrative it has unfortunately made itself believe. And it is leading to the destruction of Ukrainians. And this is done with a very clear objective to take over the territory of what is now Ukraine. The men who wrote this are a club of philosophers, or sooner than philosophers, you would call them methodologists. And I think that it is important to consider the correlation between this so-called school of applied philosophy with the mechanisms and the works of Goebbels and his cohorts. So what we're seeing is a sort of version 2. And the question is, one of the questions is, what type of international legal responsibility do the philosophers or methodologists who create so-called genocidal handbooks and programs, psychological and informational operations in front of international law for committing what we're seeing in Ukraine as being realized as genocide? Timofey Sergeytsev is the main author of this genocidal handbook. He is also a political technocrat and has direct links with training Ukraine's presidents and politicians. In particular, Kuchma, the second president of Ukraine, Viktor Pinchuk, and Yatsenyuk, the former prime minister. They all employed his services for political technology, elections, etc. Importantly, this school of methodologists that they adhere to is really focused on the idea, so thoughts. And this is what our center and Kauser's center is really focused on as well, is the power of ideas and thoughts. So they believe that more important than the rules of physics are the rules of thought formation, because they want to create a future and a world which adheres to the vision of the Kremlin. And it relates to Marx's axiom that philosophers only interpret the world, but the point is to change it. And they're moving to changing it using something called soft power, in effect. Soft power is the influencing of preferences and behaviors of various actors in the international arena. Although many believe that that Joseph Nye is the creator of the term, he coined the term, but it is a much older concept, and it is directly related to psychological and informational operations that target human perceptions. And within that targeting, these operations specifically focus on the political and societal security sectors. It's a different topic. What are the components of political and societal security? But it all comes down to intangible state power components. The main objective is to get you to think, believe, and eventually do something or not do something that you would otherwise not be prone to doing. Interesting connection is between the post-truth politics and the constructivist theory in international relations. because constructivism, the school of Alexander Wendt, for instance, refers to the claim that ideas, beside material matters, have an impact on politics. So here we see a correlation between the different schools from the Russians and let's say Western academia. This differs importantly from idealism because these ideas do not come from a vacuum as they do in idealism. In constructivism, the ideas are embedded inside of a historical context, but also need and require institutional support to be effective. And this institutional support, we see the ramifications of it as it pertains to the Russian Federation, because the Kremlin spends enormous amounts of money, hundreds of billions, in order to influence the perceptions of humans all over the planet in order to promote its own empirical ambitions. Just a quick look at these institution, the ideas. So the institution dependent and independent identity ideas. It comes down to how do we look at the level of national integration. So the cultural, ethnic, linguistic, religious concepts and feelings, territorial, the connection that I belong to this territory, and that collective memory. The second component is the strength of national leadership. So either you target that in order to bring down the perception of the strength, or you raise it, and also the perceived relevance of the national strategy to the common interests. An aggressor state or corporation, but today we're talking on a state level, they will manipulate these three main components of national security, directly related to political security and societal security, in order to cause conflict and war and weaken a given territory. I'm sorry that I did this. Excuse me. Let me get, oops. So just this table is extremely important for the analyst when we're considering not only psychological operations or Russian misinformation policies, but actually all international security relations as a whole. And there are different various levels and sectors of analysis. Most importantly, we have these existential values. Every country will have its own existential values, which an enemy state will use in the realm of psychological operations, institutional ideas that will target the existential values. So with the military, this would be the territory, the public space. In the political security sector, this is the integrity of governance. In the economic, the psychological operations will be targeting the integrity of markets, the basic needs, the welfare. Societal is that identity and culture, and environmental. They target the integrity of living conditions and the health and well-being. And we can see it happening from the subunit, so that i.e. the individual, the human voter, all the way up to the global system level. And information operations are developed to target from human to the global level, as we're seeing with the Russian Federation. And Russian Federation has been employing something that is called basically strategic separatism. And they're saving us to death. They're not only saving Ukrainians to death, but they started doing so with Chechnya, in Georgia, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Ukraine, with the strategic separatist enclaves that they create. And this, without spending too much time on this formula, basically how they manage to create separatist sentiment and territories within a foreign country, it's by combining a military presence with politically organized transnational crime, so corruption, and psychological operations. And that combination is dispersed over the all of the components of a state's power potential. We see it happening beyond the region of the Black Sea in the European Union. Unfortunately, the question of Bosnia and Herzegovina is coming up more frequently in the media. being influenced by the Serbian actors who are directly supported by the Kremlin, and also the Hungarian influence in trying to not only weaken the unity within the EU and NATO, but also inside Ukraine using the Rusene ethnic minority group as a weapon. The funding of extreme right and left-wing parties, Black Lives Matter organizations, National Rifle Association, to name a few. Analysis shows that not all, obviously, but a large amount of the organizations or individuals who support these organizations can be linked to Russian policies. There is a duty to prevent genocide, and it is a codified international legal duty. President Volodymyr Zelensky has appealed to the world at large to not only identify the Russian Federation as a global terrorist state, but also to identify what they are doing in Ukraine as genocide. Timothy Snyder, a lead academic in our global civil times, has appealed not only to academia, but to the political level and the general, let's say, intellectuals globally, to understand what is happening here is a programmed, systemic, organized genocide against the Ukrainian people. We also had an appeal made to Berlin's prosecutor's office against the Russian Federation, directly related to this genocide handbook, by Thomas Hillman, a Christian Democratic Union from Germany, in order a plea to stop Russia. And the duty to prevent genocide in this respect can also, and is actually, directly related to the duty, or not only the will, of countries to provide Ukraine with humanitarian aid or defense aid. Coming to an end, I would like to present a few solutions that are required. And first and foremost, it is that awareness of that multi-level soft power security threats exist. So basically the awareness of the messaging, how messages are being formulated in order to change the way that you behave, in order to make you not really against what Russia is doing, or even support what Russia is doing. The recognition of Russia's post-Soviet political criminal nexus. So this is basically Russian corruption is statecraft, putting it very broadly. We must recognize that follow the money also holds true when we're talking about information operations and psychological operations. So even though we can't touch messages, we feel them, and somebody is paying somebody to have those emotions created within us, as it pertains to Russia's global war against humanity at this time. And also we need to coordinate and use soft power operations to create that common understanding and peacemaking based on common interests. And those are my three solutions. I have one more slide, but I think that maybe I can stop here and we can move to a discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lada, for, I would say, brilliantly directing us to some of the key aspects of Russian Federation and their, the idea of pushing towards post-truthism. Ladies and gentlemen, we are also happy to note that our co-founder, Dr. Hilal Mohideen, is with us. We will welcome him during the question and answer session. The audience, at this point in time of the session, we'd like to open the floor for a moderated question and answer, and I'm inviting our advisors and co-founder to kindly join us in question and answer period. And first, I would like to welcome David Newman to have the privilege of asking the first question to Dr. Lada. David.
Lada, thanks for the presentation, concise and impactful. What is of interest to me, if we can bring this right back to Canada and civil society and government in Canada. What contribution towards the solutions that you propose? Certainly the awareness aspect is what this very event, this webinar today is about. But could you expand on what would be a hopeful contribution from civil society and government of Canada at all levels to the challenges which you've demonstrated are taking place and impacting seriously negatively on the peoples of Ukraine and a threat to global humanity?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, David, for that question. It is a big, loaded one. Let me start with what governments can do, and then move to civil society and different components of civil society. First and foremost, the government of Canada really has to understand that the balance between the freedom of speech and journalism must be held with a duty, the governmental duty, to make sure that the national security, particularly political and societal security of Canada, remains safe. And the manner in which it has to do so is use technology, use artificial intelligence, for instance, to identify the source of messaging, to understand clearly how which messaging is targeting which components of national security, in order to be able to not only understand the enemy, the aggressor behavior, but also to have preemptive strikes in the media sphere, for instance. Informing the society, the Canadian civilians, is also an important aspect. Unfortunately, we see, for instance, in the Netherlands, a sort of reluctance for the government to get involved with the journalism, or warning people that, hey, our intelligence services have a strong reason to believe that this account, let's say on Facebook, for instance, or that this journalist or this NGO is actually working against the values and principles upon which our country is built, and collecting that information. So that's, broadly speaking, quickly on the governmental side. On the civil society side, well, let's divide quickly civil society into business. And businesses also have a responsibility to understand which companies are directly involved in and earning money from Russian policies, for instance, and not to do business with them. NGOs cooperate. I think that centers such as Kauser's center is exemplary in understanding, researching, applying new technologies, understanding how new technologies could be applied in order to make our hearts and minds as safe as possible, without disturbing that very, very, very delicate balance between our civil, human, and political rights. So that I hope answers your question a little bit.
I pass the next question over to Gary Sims.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Dr. Lada. So it's difficult and fascinating to, try to get our heads around. But in your opinion, the Russian Federation would be spending, and I think you actually used the word billions of dollars in this field. Would that be true?
Yes, more. I think that I don't want to make an error in the annual budget of Sputnik in Russia today, but it was in the tens of billions. So, and that's just television.
And so when we use the term "follow the money," which is very important, is that being done with some effect, that you could actually say a specific organization has received funds and they can be sourced?
Yes, I don't want to name any organizations here, but the Netherlands has done a really good job with identifying Hungarian organizations, for instance, that are operating in their territory. The Black Lives Matters has been directly related to a number of NGOs supporting or demonstrating, particularly frontline violent demonstrators were linked to sources from the Kremlin. And in Canada, there is a global research institute that has been pegged and marked numerous times by professionals as being being paid or on the books of Kremlin and pro-Kremlin manipulation. And then you go further and deeper, certain professors, certain institutes, and and then again we hit that delicate balance of how do you remove a professor from his position when he is feeding anti-democratic sentiment in his classroom, for instance, in Canada, or her classroom.
So with a different subject, but offshore money, we've heard about the Panama Papers, that type of thing, and Canada's requiring some disclosure and transparency on that. Could a similar method be used, with regard to this disinformation effort?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's tracking and tracing. So not only the individuals, but the individuals have bank accounts. Like the individuals or individual organizations, they have bank accounts, and then it comes into the question of when there is a reason to believe that these individuals and I say organizations or individual human beings, the intelligence services have an obligation and a duty to inquire and ensure that their messaging is really what they believe and not what they're being paid for as a foreign agent.
Right. And, you mentioned the Netherlands and, some efforts in Canada. Is there, in your mind, significant coordination going on that's appropriate between the countries that are opposed to the Russian Federation's disinformation?
I think that it's not enough. Too slow to move. In the former Soviet states and former communist countries, there's a better understanding of what is happening. And in Western countries, or let's say the countries who have had a longer track record of freedom and human rights, they still have a very difficult time accepting long-term psychological warfare as not conspiracy theory. And that is a major block of really bringing all of the teams to the same table. And one of the things that I believe should be done and isn't being done effectively is really having Ukrainian experts come and teach Western experts. Because what we've seen for many, many years is that the Western experts will come, and including NATO, and they will say, this is strategic communication, and this is what you need to do, and this is how you do it. But Ukraine has a long tradition and a knowledge and a deeper understanding of the workings of the KGB and the SVR, much stronger and deeper than Canada ever will. So that exchange is missing and desperately needed.
And so there's a fairly elaborate kind of coordination or collaboration that occurred, following 9/11 around terrorism. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that if Russia was declared a terrorist state, that would provide any more tools to sort of the tracking and transparency?
Absolutely. It would open up, first and foremost, it would unblock certain procedures within the United Nations. And it would facilitate the removal of Russia's veto right within the Security Council. There are other procedures that are currently being considered to do so, but a terrorist or state organization cannot vote inside of the UN. So that is one key, but also all of the financial legislation as to who can be investigated and to what depth. That having been said, we have to be very careful that before investigations are opened and bank accounts seized, there is sufficient evidence and that due diligence with our freedoms and rights has been conducted before shutting down the individuals that are after our civilization.
Thank you very much. Kausar, I think I yield the floor.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin, if you would like to pose a question to Dr. Lada, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lada and David and Gary. I am sorry. I apologize for being late to join the session. I was busy with some other activities and I was actually trying to research. Do you hear me properly?
Poorly.
Poorly. Let me change my speaker. So I know that I have some problems with my speaker here and I'm going to use the headphone. Probably that would solve the problem. Do you hear me now?
It's worse.
Am I audible better or it's worse? It's even worse. Am I audible?
Please ask your question. If I don't hear it, I will ask you to repeat it.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are. You can ask the question. I can relate to Dr. Lada if she has difficulty getting it. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, okay. So, Lada, I was just doing some research because I will be presenting the next week on 3rd, and I was curious to know why the global communities, especially European Union, NATO, and North American societies, North American media are falling behind in the competition, and how Russia is really doing very well in spreading disinformation all over the world, why the other part of the world, especially the world that is really not going to buy any of the ideas of any of the information that Russia is spreading, and still why they can fight. This is information warfare, a kind of psychological warfare, information warfare, whatever we say. So both sides should have equal strength. And what is the main drawback for these countries, especially the developed countries and now not developed countries, especially the Europe, North American countries and NATO members, just to not focus more on disinformation warfare, to take part in this information warfare and to try to win? Just I think a very naive sort of question, but many people are asking same sort of things when I was talking to them informally last 2-3 days. They were just saying something like that. Okay, so do you think that North American media apparatus are much weaker than the Soviet Union's one? And people are having better sympathy for the Russians, that no, Russians Sputnik is even shut down and some other things are being screened out, their information are not being published on Facebook and Twitter and other places, so they are under some kind of censorship, not the NATO member states or American media sections. So what would be the answer to that question? People's common perception, I'm talking about the perception. You spoke about awareness raising, that's okay, fine. But, still people are following media, and what media, what sort of information they are receiving from media would really count in making their opinion.
Let me start with the need for critical thinking. And unfortunately, in our globalized world where material wealth is valued much more than personal joy and happiness, is directly related to the lowering of the attention span of humans and the training of critical thought in schools. So from the very basic kindergarten, critical thinking should probably be brought into the curriculums globally. A very good question as it pertains to NATO and the, in my opinion, losing position that it is holding in the information sphere can be found in a document that was drafted for NATO by renowned experts on disinformation that Russia would use directly related to closing skies of other countries. And Ukraine, it's a 250-page document, and Ukraine was actually brought up there. What would happen if there was a war and Ukraine needed to have its skies closed? And these experts wrote clearly, black and white, that the Russians would use a myth that this would start nuclear war, and that and World War III. This information was held by individuals working for NATO and in other governments, and clearly was not effectively studied, taken seriously. And had it been, I'm sure that we would have had a better defense and many more people would be alive in Ukraine than they are today. So that may be because of a little bit of everybody's too busy to read the work that the citizens are paying for. But also there's a historical tendency of Western countries to want to keep the peace and not to disturb. But the Russian Federation has the Reds have always been disturbing. They've always been pushing aggressively. And the West is not, of course, very clean, and dirty politics exists everywhere. But the West is limited by values and principles that really exist. And the West has a responsibility. We do have democratic control and oversight over this defense and security sectors, which are tough things to control, but we have those institutions and the checks and balances, which limit the amount of interference the governments you can feel in your private life as a citizen. Russia doesn't have that. Russia is a very authoritarian regime, which I do not feel sorry for the Russians whatsoever, because they have been living like this for hundreds of years, and they seem to be okay with it. An example of this is sanctions. The more intense the sanctions or the effects of the sanctions become within Russia, the more support we're starting to see from the Russian citizens. They rather than like in Western countries, we would be demonstrating like change this policy because our energy prices are too high, for instance, or we can't eat anything but porridge. But the Russians have a different perception that needs to be really addressed and well understood, that it means our leader must be doing something right if the evil West, the evil methodologically individualistic buccaneer capitalist West, is hurting us. And this is one of the concepts that needs to be looked into by Western academia, by Western governments. And the West should really stop playing tennis by hitting back the ball. The Russians, as we see with this genocidal handbook, they create, by using minds and ideas, they are creating the social fabric in which we are living. And Western governments don't do that. Western corporations do that. But countries have a feeling that they can't, and they should. It's their duty. It's a part of the social contract.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hilal Muhyiddin, do you have any complimentary question, or we can move forward with?
So do have something to ask you. It's a complimentary question indeed. It's about public sympathy and public trust all over the world. Okay, like the Western media is also not being trusted by people all over the world. They are distrusting, mistrusting these ones more than that. They have fed us up with so many misinformation in the past, and we just debunked those information ourselves. So now we can't trust anyone. All of them are at fault. So this is a common perception worldwide so far I see here. So this is a time, this is an age of mistrust on any information from any part. So academics, one of my reservations is that academics, I think academics can't make much difference, because if we write a journal paper, only academicians and those who have need for that, they will follow it. Maybe 22, 25, 500 people will read it maximum. But one Facebook feed is being watched in an hour by 5 million people. There are something.
Mhm.
One YouTube TikTok is being viewed by say
Mhm.
10 billion people in an hour. And one journal article that we produce, say just using 1 year with hard work, 500 people wrote in 5 years.
Mhm.
So I don't think that academics can make much difference. There are civil societies and other platforms. And how may these instant platforms that are creating edutainment make giving people education at the same time entertaining them, like TikToks and other things, other platforms?
Mhm.
These are nonsense platforms so far we understand, but they have much more impact to create opinion, global opinion. Do you think that we need to switch our focus from institutional environment like the civil society and academics to something else? Do you think that might work to some extent, especially at this juncture when we need a quick solution? Not we don't have time to wait for another 4 or 5 years to get something very serious.
Mhm. Post-truth was identified by Oxford Dictionary 2016 as the most popular word in the world. So how can we trust if they have removed the concept of truth from society? If you have no truth, what do you trust? And who do you believe in? And we're going back to that school of constructivism, or the theory of constructivism, and that ideas and identity, and that everybody has their own perception. The next part is deconstructivism, and that's that area that we have already entered, and academia knows about this. And the next step is reconstructivism. So while we're entering the next phase of the fourth industrial revolution, and we have new technologies and we have other technologies that we can't even believe just around the corner, of course we need to use them. Of course we need to know how to use them. And unfortunately, that link between academia has to stay. And you have to read books. And individuals who think have to think longer than 16 seconds. And that unity of public-private partnership, of academia, of study needs to be further developed. And it is my professional and personal stance that the people who are going to be reconstructing the world have to be doing it in a manner that is focused on the common good. It is a responsibility. We have to use the wisdom, and we have to be courageous in order to ensure that the common good is not put down as non-existent, like like they have done with truth in this world. So combination, definitely academics. For instance, I have a nice example. There is a journal, Connections, which is a top security and defense journal. Same problem. Who wants to read it? Nobody has time. Everybody's very busy. So the concept of taking the abstract and investing money into making maybe a 30-second animation film that will capture the audience, get the message across. You don't have to read 30 pages, and you can put it on Facebook. You can or other social medias. and create new social medias? Why are we limiting ourselves to what is already out there?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hilal Mahiuddin. I would like to come in now. Thank you so much for two brilliant questions. Dr. Lada, as I said, I will take this privilege to bring you back to one of your remarks at the beginning of your presentation. You did mention about the book of genocide Russian Federation has come up with. So I would like to take you back there and share a little bit more about the whole concept and the scheme that Russian Federation has come up with. What do you think the primary tenets of this scheme? It lies on historical facts, or there are facts manufactured, which is kind of relevant to your lecture today, disinformation and propaganda. So can you briefly tell us some of the key aspects of that book and what it is based on, if there is some facts there? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It is based on a fact that we should change together. And the fact that the Russian Federation did not take over Kiev in 3 or 4 days is proof that their information is wrong and that they are believing their own misinformation. So this is an avenue of pure weakness that has been exposed on an informational level. And the fact that Moscow believes that it cannot exist without Ukraine, as Brzezinski had written, as long as Moscow believes that, it will have that need and the drive to eliminate Ukraine, as we've seen for over 300 years, even under the leadership of the German lady Catherine the Great. She was the first one to remove the Ukrainian language. So this is a historical process. But this is the first time in Ukrainian history or global history where the Ukrainians stand united on values and freedom and positive energy, as banal as it may sound. And people oftentimes say, oh, you can't break it down to evil, if a fight between good and evil. But it comes down to a Ukrainian fight to save civilization as it has developed in that sphere where human life actually has meaning, more meaning than just enslavement and abuse in order to make money for people who are extremely wealthy and far removed from humanity. So I think that maybe I answered your question, and history is riddled with Russian genocidal behavior. And I call your attention again to the poor Chechens. It's terrible that globally people connect in their heads and minds Kadyrov, this monstrous man who belongs in prison, with Chechens. And Chechens have a wonderful culture, a wonderful faith even that has been destroyed by Russia because of its empire. If we look at what happened in South Ossetia, Abkhazia, in Georgia, also Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Pridnestrovia in Moldova, Crimea, it's the same method. And it is a method that they save them to death. And they take over. They don't do very much in those territories other than natural resources and expansion through corruption.
Absolutely. Of course, we do know the Holodomor itself, the weaponization of food in 1933 that caused millions of deaths in Ukraine. Dr. Lada, my next question is about a beautiful phrase that you used and term that you used, strategic separatism, and you have cited a number of cases which lends to the credence of the idea that Russian Federation has a master plan in this region to start disturbances, chaos, and confusion, and to achieve their objective. So according to your observation, and you are right now, in the area. So do you think what is the next game plan, and how Russian Federation is actually advancing this concept of strategic separation into the next level, and within maybe a couple of years or a decade that you see is going to come?
Mhm. Well, in the next couple of years and decade, I sincerely hope that the Kremlin will not exist in the format that it has been existing in, and that it will be a little bit more peace oriented. But I doubt it. We can see that the Kremlin has supported also a separatist sentiment in Spain, the Catalonians. I remember also speaking with the former ambassador to Spain here, who was extremely concerned about that reach of Russia's fifth column. We should remember that Russia is not the Soviet Union, but Russia is pretending that it is the Soviet Union. And my concern also, we have to look at those poor former captive nations that belong to Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. I mean, we have all, like even Uzbekistan. There are nations, there are people there that are really fighting for Ukraine. And they're supporting this democratic feeling, albeit Muslim countries, which have a different approach and to formerly Western or formerly like Christian organizations. Or Christian based, but the values of Muslimism and or Islam, sorry, and Christendom and even Hinduism are based on actually mutual respect, and that's something that we need to be focusing on, supporting and uniting, cooperating. I think it was Gary who asked, "How are we uniting enough in this informational sphere?" And no. When is the last time that we heard of the North Americans, Europeans, and the Commonwealth of Independent States, so-called member states, discussing and creating solutions for a vision of the future that they want, and not one that is imposed by the Kremlin?
Thank you so much. David, yes, please go ahead. We have very limited period.
I'm just going to be very quick. I've heard throughout this in your contribution the word integrity and the word truth. And that, of course, as you've identified, is fundamental. And it seems to me that it goes back to the values of Rotary and the purpose of service above self people. We must emphasize truth, and we must learn how to best, as individuals, determine truth. And it's got to be in our homes, it's got to be in our school systems, it's got to be, of course, in our public communications. And what I've been witnessing in the U.S. in January 6th hearings is how difficult it is to contribute to public understanding of complex issues, but based on truth, based on evidence. And I have great hope that can be a model for the future to deal with the Kremlin-like Steve Bannons of the world, who are disseminators of disinformation for their own selfish purposes. So thanks for your contribution, Lada. I'm grateful.
Thank you, David. So, the audience, we are at the last part of our session this afternoon and evening in Ukraine. So, we'd like to go back to Dr. Lada for her concluding remarks, her hopes and fears for the future. It is important to listen to her because she is not only a scholar, a practitioner in security industry, and she has traveled widely, spoken widely, and published quite extensively. So let's ask her, what does she see in the future in terms of hopes and fears of this crisis in an extraordinary scale? And also, let's all ask her that what she suggests for us in Canada, and with particularly the diaspora, both Ukrainian and Russian, those who live here but still are connected with their people back in their both the places. Some of the advices maybe Dr. Lada would be more willing to share at the end of her presentation today. So your final thoughts and final comments, Dr. Lada.
Truth has meaning. And if I were to belong to a cult of death, my truth would be that I take pleasure in slicing up little children. And that would be a truth. And truth can be also from the very light that I would love to give everything to everybody and be saintly and holy. That is two different camps. What we are seeing and there has to be that balance. There has to be that duality of responsibility as we see throughout history. Currently, we see a complete disbalance. And I use the term Machiavellian fear has been installed by the truth carriers of the cult of light and goodness. And as long as that fear continues to be not only manipulated using psychological and information operations, but sown, we are going to be seeing a very, very, very losing battle in Ukraine that will spin out of control. We have, I don't like calling it a hybrid war, because war has always been played on different chessboards and economic and energy, etc. But we're so globalized and so interdependent that if we don't start seeing some real leadership that believes in those values and principles that the preambles of the United Nations are based on, I see nothing good happening. And I see hunger, death, far beyond the borders of Ukraine. And sometimes when people lie, you just have to stop respecting them and showing them respect by listening. So that's the truth. Sometimes it's just not worth listening to evil manipulators who want money over life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lada. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada and our advisors and co-founder, I would like to express my deep gratitude for making time to speak to us and suggested a very interesting set of recommendations moving forward in order to defeat the disinformation coming out of Russian Federation with regards to Ukraine conflict. The audience, Dr. Lada covered, I would say, quite large landscape today in her session. And she touched upon a number of aspects in her slides, as well as her question and answer session. I'm not going to repeat there, but I just want to pick up her recommendation. First is awareness, then a greater cooperation amongst the Western nations, which is not enough, according to her current observation, to dispel the danger of disinformation coming out from the Russian Federation. And also, she candidly mentioned in responding to Dr. Hilal's question, and which really inspired me moving forward, not only with the project, but also to spend more time in fighting disinformation. She mentioned about deconstructivism. And she started saying that the constructivist theories in international relationship, and now it is time to deconstruction and also reconstructing a future of truth, a future of facts, a future of hope and fear, where there is no bully, no authoritarianism, and where our children would live long and happily and freely. With these words, I would like to end today's session. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Lada. And we would like to invite you for the next session as well, if you have time and scope, and we would like to enlighten more from your thoughts and your works in the future. The audience, stay safe and stay well, and do not forget the Ukrainians, because it is our hope that we are going to stand behind them, with them in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.